Respected, legendary, and unforgettable, Kurt Russell leans back in the dim glow of studio light, the lines on his face tracing decades of laughter, anger, heartbreak, and survival. At 74, there's a gravity in his eyes now that wasn't there during the adrenaline-charged days of stunt falls and explosive westerns. He exhales slowly, the kind of breath that carries a lifetime of unspoken stories, and then, in a voice cracked yet steady, he begins to recount what he has long kept buried. The truth about Rob Reiner. The story begins in the 1980s, when Hollywood was a shimmering mirage of glamour, but behind the cameras, everything was more complicated. Russell had admired Reiner, as the world did. Talented, charismatic, seemingly unflappable, but he had learned the hard way that brilliance often shadows darkness. Kurt speaks of late nights on sets where laughter veiled tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. He recalls one particular night during the filming of a high-stakes project when Reiner's temper flared in ways that shocked even the hardened crew, leaving whispered rumors to ripple through Hollywood circles for years. Kurt's voice trembles slightly as he admits he stayed silent then, out of fear, out of loyalty, out of an unspoken code that he now regrets breaking. There is a pause, a silence, so heavy it feels as if the room itself is holding its breath. He shifts, hands clasped tightly, and begins speaking of the personal cost. How friendships frayed under the weight of ambition. How colleagues became casualties in a war nobody would admit existed. Kurt tells of Rob's charming public persona, the way he could make everyone feel like the most important person in the room, and then juxtaposes it with the moments of icy detachment, decisions that left careers dangling by threads. I've watched people I cared about hurt themselves trying to meet expectations. By the time he leans back and allows himself a long, shuddering breath, the room feels heavier, saturated with the weight of Hollywood's hidden truths. The story of admiration, fear, regret, and painful loyalty has begun to unfold, and Kurt Russell, at 74, has just scratched the surface. Beloved, iconic, and unyielding, Kurt Russell's gaze drifts toward a wall lined with framed photographs, snapshots of triumph, laughter frozen in time, and some faces that now carry a silent sorrow. He begins to speak of the early days with Rob Reiner, before fame had thickened the air with pretense. There was a spark then, a shared energy that made projects feel alive, that made the impossible seem effortless. But Kurt's tone darkens as he recalls the subtle cracks beneath the surface, small slights, whispers of manipulation, and a tendency to wield charm as a weapon. He admits that he ignored the first signs, wanting to believe in the purity of collaboration, in the promise of creative kinship. He recounts one winter afternoon on a remote set in New Mexico, a shoot that was supposed to be exhilarating, but became a lesson in hidden cruelty. Reiner's perfectionism veered into unpredictability, and what started as minor criticism escalated into public humiliations, leaving cast and crew tense and shaken. Kurt's voice falters for a moment as he reveals that he stayed, not because of loyalty, but because leaving felt like surrendering to something he couldn't yet name. The cameras, the lights, the applause, everything that seemed glamorous outside, masked a quiet erosion of trust, a slow accumulation of wounds that no one dared to acknowledge. Russell then turns toward the private pain that few could see, the impact on his family. He speaks of phone calls from his children, of late nights when he returned home emotionally battered, the weight of Hollywood's hidden battles pressing down on him. He recalls his partner, Goldie Hawn, trying to shield him from heartbreak while also grappling with her own unspoken fears. Kurt's voice cracks as he admits that for years, the tension between admiration and resentment made him question his own judgment. The irony wasn't lost on him. He revered Rob Reiner as a cinematic genius while privately feeling cornered, manipulated, and sometimes unsafe in his presence. He describes a night in Los Angeles after a particularly grueling shoot, the city shimmering with life outside, while inside a suite of a hotel, whispered arguments and suppressed tears replayed in his mind. He admits to bouts of guilt, wondering if he had contributed to the toxicity if silence had made him complicit. The confessions tumble out like confetti in reverse, each memory heavier than the last. A canceled dinner with a co-star who would later reveal betrayal, a mismanaged scene that almost ruined a career, and quiet moments where he caught Reiner's cold calculation beneath layers of charm. Russell pauses, a soft sigh punctuating the tension. Then he recounts moments of unexpected grace, times when Rob Reiner's brilliance shone untainted, moments that reminded him why he had once trusted the man. There was a generosity of spirit in fleeting flashes, a joke on set that made everyone laugh, an insight during a script meeting that elevated the story, a subtle acknowledgement of talent that could have belonged to anyone. Kurt's voice trembles as he admits that these fleeting glimpses of goodness made the betrayals sting even more, leaving scars that lingered for decades. He leans back, rubbing his hands over his face, the shadows of the studio pressing close, and for a moment, he allows himself the weight of a truth long withheld. That admiration can coexist with heartbreak, that loyalty can coexist with fear, and that genius often carries a cost hidden from the public eye. Kurt Russell's story is only beginning. Yet even in this early revelation, the audience senses a lifetime of secrets, regrets, and moments of painful clarity, all bound together by the man who captivated the world, yet left those closest to him quietly trembling. Legendary, relentless, and deeply human. Kurt Russell's voice softens as he steps into the chapters of his life where fear and loyalty collided most painfully. He speaks of the moments after a project's end, when the lights dimmed and the applause faded, leaving the raw reality of fractured relationships. There were colleagues who vanished quietly, friendships that deteriorated under the strain of ambition, and whispered warnings that nobody outside Hollywood would understand. Kurt admits, for the first time on record, that he often felt trapped between admiration and disillusionment, torn between the man he wanted Rob Reiner to be and the man he actually was. He recalls a private dinner years ago with a handful of actors who had known Rob intimately. The conversation was polite, layered with civility, but beneath it simmered resentment and sorrow. Kurt remembers the subtle glances, the brief, half-hidden sighs, the way each person seemed to carry an invisible burden. We all loved his work, he confesses quietly, but some of us paid for it in ways we never spoke of. The camera lingers on his hands, roughened by years of stunt work and life in Hollywood's unforgiving spotlight, and for a moment, the viewer senses the physical weight of unspoken truths. Then there are the personal tragedies that end. Intersected with the professional, Kurt shares, for the first time, the story of a dear friend who had been undermined by decisions Rob made behind closed doors, a friend whose illness was exacerbated by stress and heartbreak, and whose final words reflected both gratitude and regret. Kurt breaks slightly as he recounts standing by the hospital bed, holding hands with someone he loved, all while silently replaying the betrayals that had led them there. He admits that he carried that guilt privately for decades, never revealing the intersection of Hollywood ambition and human fragility to anyone outside the tight circle of insiders. That Russell's gaze becomes far away as he begins to talk about other Hollywood figures whose lives were quietly shaped or broken by their interactions with Reiner. There is mention of Robert De Niro, whose mentorship was as intimidating as it was formative, Goldie Hawn, whose protective instincts often shielded him from emotional collapse, and John Carpenter, whose camaraderie provided a rare sanctuary amid chaos. Each name is spoken with reverence, yet tinged with sadness, as if recalling moments where genius and cruelty danced an intricate, painful waltz. He revisits the public appearances, award shows, and interviews where smiles mask the truth. Kurt admits to the emotional gymnastics required to maintain a facade, joking at press events while privately crumbling, exchanging pleasantries while nursing wounds invisible to the cameras. The audience feels the tension between performance and reality, the impossible task of reconciling public admiration with private disillusionment. He speaks of nights alone in his hotel room, replaying scenes, conversations, and minor betrayals, wondering if he had been naive, or if Hollywood simply demanded sacrifice beyond measure. Finally, he leans forward, voice low and intimate, describing a moment that still haunts him, an encounter with Rob Reiner years later. A brief exchange of words that could have been warmth, but instead carried the weight of unresolved grievances. Kurt admits to having walked away, physically and emotionally, knowing that some truths would remain unspoken, some wounds unhealed, but also understanding that the world outside would never see the cracks. It is here, in the quiet admission of lingering pain, that the audience feels the first true depth of the story, the intersection of genius, betrayal, and heartbreak that would define his reflections for the rest of his life. Respected, enduring, and profoundly introspective, Kurt Russell now begins to speak of the moments when Hollywood's glamorous veneer completely fell away, leaving only the raw, unvarnished human cost. He recalls the filming of a pivotal movie in the early 90s, when tension behind the scenes reached a boiling point. Rob Reiner, brilliant yet unpredictable, made decisions that left some actors sidelined, others humiliated. Kurt's voice falters as he remembers watching a close colleague, someone he had considered a surrogate sibling, shrink under the weight of Reiner's critiques. That day, he admits, was a turning point, the moment he realized that genius often exacts a toll that no one outside the industry could ever understand. He recounts the personal anguish that came from balancing professional respect with private resentment. There were sleepless nights, where the memories of public humiliations collided with the grief of family struggles. Kurt speaks of a brother whose illness worsened while he was caught in the web of Hollywood's expectations, and of quiet moments with his children when he tried to be present but found himself emotionally absent. He admits that, at times, the shadow of Rob Reiner's decisions loomed so large it felt impossible to reconcile the public persona with the private pain. Russell becomes somber as he tells of the whispered confessions among cast and crew, conversations that only happened in hushed tones over coffee or in the back corners of sound stages. He mentions other legends, Harrison Ford, Christopher Walken, and Goldie Hawn, whose lives intersected with Reiner's in ways both beautiful and heartbreaking. Each anecdote reveals layers of Hollywood secrecy, missed opportunities, friendships tested, and reputations quietly eroded. Kurt pauses to reflect, voice low, acknowledging the complexity of the man he once admired and the lasting emotional scars left behind. He then shifts to the intimate, private heartbreak that only close family witnessed. Kurt recounts evenings spent comforting his children after tense encounters on set, or holding his partner as they navigated the tension between love and professional loyalty. He speaks candidly about the guilt he carried, the quiet fear that silence had made him complicit in the emotional damage inflicted on those around him. The vulnerability in his voice is palpable, a stark contrast to the tough, adventurous image audiences remember on screen. As he continues, Russell reveals a rarely discussed aspect of his relationship with Reiner, the rare moments of tenderness and connection that made the betrayals even more painful. He remembers instances when Reiner's charm and brilliance reminded him why he had once trusted the man, fleeting flashes of warmth that made the coldness afterward even more devastating. Kurt's eyes glisten as he admits that those moments created an emotional whiplash, a cycle of hope and despair that he carried for decades. By the end of this chapter, the weight of unspoken truths, regrets, and quiet heartbreak hangs in the air. Kurt Russell, 74, allows himself a moment of stillness, the silence speaking volumes about the costs of loyalty, the burden of admiration, and the complexity of a man who could inspire greatness yet leave scars hidden from public view. The audience is left with the unmistakable sense that Hollywood's glamorous surface conceals a labyrinth of secrets, and Kurt Russell is one of the few willing to reveal its haunting depths. Beloved, seasoned, and painfully honest, Kurt Russell leans forward, voice low, as if the studio walls themselves are witnesses to his confessions. He begins recounting the hidden struggles, the invisible battles that Hollywood never lets the cameras capture. He speaks of late nights pacing alone in trailers, haunted by decisions made in the heat of production, wondering if loyalty to a colleague had cost him or others too dearly. There were moments when the line between admiration and resentment blurred completely, leaving him questioning not only Rob Reiner's choices, but his own judgment and integrity. He recalls a particular evening on the set of a critical scene where emotions ran high. Reiner, brilliant yet mercurial, demanded perfection in ways that left actors and crew shaken. Kurt remembers watching a fellow actor break down, a quiet sob hidden behind a makeup mirror, and feeling powerless to intervene. It was terrifying, he admits, voice barely above a whisper, to see someone you care about crushed and know there was nothing you could do. Not then, not without consequences. The memory lingers, raw and visceral, a reminder of Hollywood's hidden cruelty and the personal cost of brilliance that Russell's reflection turns to his family, the private heartbreak that accompanied his professional turmoil. He speaks of missed birthdays, quiet dinners interrupted by calls from sets, and children sensing the tension even when he tried to shield them. Goldie Hawn, he says, became both a sanctuary and a sounding board, but even her unwavering support could not erase the emotional weight of navigating a world where loyalty and fear often collided. He admits that, at times, he felt trapped in a cycle of admiration and disappointment. Unsure if leaving would betray his principles or simply preserve his peace, he moves on to the broader tapestry of Hollywood, naming familiar legends whose lives intersected with Reiners in ways both inspiring and devastating. Harrison Ford, whose subtle mentorship often clashed with Reiner's intensity. Christopher Walken, whose sharp wit occasionally masked quiet suffering. And John Carpenter, whose friendship offered a rare reprieve from the emotional turbulence. Kurt's voice wavers as he recounts these connections, revealing the hidden layers of loyalty, betrayal, and quiet heartbreak that played out behind closed doors. Each anecdote deepens the sense that fame and genius are inseparable from pain, that admiration often carries an unspoken price. Russell finally allows himself to speak of rare moments of grace, the fleeting glimpses of kindness that made the betrayals sting even more. A joke shared on set, a private acknowledgement of talent, a fleeting camaraderie, moments that reminded him why he had once trusted Rob Reiner, yet made the darker truths impossible to ignore. The tension between brilliance and cruelty, between inspiration and injury, defines the narrative of his decades-long journey alongside the M and by the end of this part. The emotional weight is almost tangible. Kurt Russell's confessions weave a portrait of Hollywood that is as heartbreaking as it is mesmerizing. A world where genius is inseparable from human frailty, where loyalty and love collide with betrayal and regret, and where the truths he now reveals were hidden for far too long. The audience is left suspended, teetering between shock, empathy, and the haunting awareness that the story. Beloved, seasoned, and painfully honest, Kurt Russell leans forward, voice low, as if the studio walls themselves are witnesses to his confessions. He begins recounting the hidden struggles, the invisible battles that Hollywood never let the cameras capture. He speaks of late nights pacing alone in trailers, haunted by decisions made in the heat of production, wondering if loyalty to a colleague had cost him or others too dearly. There were moments when the line between admiration and resentment blurred completely, leaving him questioning not only Rob Reiner's choices, but his own judgment and integrity. He recalls a particular evening on the set of a critical scene where emotions ran high. Reiner, brilliant yet mercurial, demanded perfection in ways that left actors and crew shaken. Kurt remembers watching a fellow actor break down, a quiet sob hidden behind a makeup mirror, and feeling powerless to intervene. It was terrifying, he admits, voice barely above a whisper, to see someone you care about crushed and know there was nothing you could do. Not then, not without consequences. The memory lingers, raw and visceral, a reminder of Hollywood's hidden cruelty and the personal cost of brilliance that Russell's reflection turns to his family, the private heartbreak that accompanied his professional turmoil. He speaks of missed birthdays, quiet dinners interrupted by calls from sets, and children sensing the tension even when he tried to shield them. Goldie Hawn, he says, became both a sanctuary and a sounding board, but even her unwavering support could not erase the emotional weight of navigating a world where loyalty and fear often collided. He admits that, at times, he felt trapped in a cycle of admiration and disappointment. Unsure if leaving would betray his principles or simply preserve his peace, he moves on to the broader tapestry of Hollywood, naming Fahmy. Liar legends whose lives intersected with Reiners in ways both inspiring and devastating. Harrison Ford, whose subtle mentorship often clashed with Reiner's intensity. Christopher Walken, whose sharp wit occasionally masked quiet suffering. And John Carpenter, whose friendship offered a rare reprieve from the emotional turbulence. Kurt's voice wavers as he recounts these connections, revealing the hidden layers of loyalty, betrayal, and quiet heartbreak that played out behind closed doors. Each anecdote deepens the sense that fame and genius are inseparable from pain, that admiration often carries an unspoken price. Russell finally allows himself to speak of rare moments of grace, the fleeting glimpses of kindness that made the betrayals sting even more. A joke shared on set, a private acknowledgement of talent, a fleeting camaraderie, moments that reminded him why he had once trusted Rob Reiner, yet made the darker truths impossible to ignore. The tension between brilliance and cruelty, between inspiration and injury, defines the narrative of his decades-long journey alongside the M, and that'd be why the end of this part. The emotional weight is almost tangible. Kurt Russell's confessions weave a portrait of Hollywood that is as heartbreaking as it is mesmerizing. A world where genius is inseparable from human frailty, where loyalty and love collide with betrayal and regret, and where the truths he now reveals were hidden for far too long. The audience is left suspended, teetering between shock, empathy, and the haunting awareness that the story is far from over. Type continue to proceed with the next part. Respected, enduring, and quietly tormented, Kurt Russell leans back in his chair, the studio lights casting long shadows across a face marked by decades of triumphs, losses, and secrets. Now, at 74, he allows himself to speak with a candor that surprises even those who have followed his career for years. He begins to recount the moments when admiration for Rob Reiner collided with heartbreak, the times when genius demanded a toll so high that even the strongest spirits wavered. It's complicated, he admits, voice low, because you want to honor the work, respect the talent, but some of the cost is just too heavy to ignore. He recalls a particularly grueling film, one that tested everyone's endurance. Reiner, exacting and brilliant, pushed the cast to emotional extremes. Kurt remembers watching a young actress break down after a scene went wrong, her tears unseen by the world, and feeling an ache he could not name. There was an expectation to perform, to smile for the cameras, to move on as if nothing had happened, but behind closed doors, pain festered. Russell's voice tightens as he describes silently shielding those he cared about, absorbing their distress, and realizing the price of loyalty was sometimes measured in emotional exhaustion and quiet despair. Russell reflects on how these professional challenges intersected painfully with his personal life. Family moments were often shadowed by tension carried home from sets, and the unspoken burden of silence became almost unbearable. He shares memories of late-night conversations with Goldie Hawn, their attempts to protect their children from the hidden turbulence of Hollywood, and the quiet fear that the emotional scars would linger long after the applause faded. His eyes glisten as he confesses the regret of choosing to endure rather than confront, a choice that has weighed on him for decades, he then paints a picture of Hollywood's interconnected web. Actors, directors, and producers whose paths crisscrossed in moments of brilliance and betrayal. Harrison Ford, Christopher Walken, and John Carpenter are all mentioned, not merely as colleagues, but as witnesses to the intricate dance of talent, power, and emotional cost that Reiner often commanded. Kurt speaks of whispered confessions shared over late-night coffees, of broken promises and quiet recoveries, and of the thin line between admiration and disillusionment. Each story builds the tension, revealing how even those celebrated for their genius carry hidden legacies of pain. That Russell's narrative turns to fleeting moments of grace that made the betrayals sting even more. There were times when Reiner's brilliance shone untainted, a private joke, an acknowledgement of talent, a rare act of kindness. Kurt's voice softens as he admits that these glimpses of warmth made it nearly impossible to reconcile the darker truths, leaving him suspended in a limbo of hope and heartbreak. Those moments, he whispers, were why I stayed, and also why I remember the pain so vividly. By the conclusion of this part, the audience is steeped in the tension of Hollywood's hidden life. Kurt Russell's confessions reveal a world where genius and cruelty coexist, where loyalty and fear intertwine, and where personal and professional lives collide in ways the public will never see. The story has reached a point of intimate vulnerability, leaving viewers immersed in the emotional labyrinth of his decades-long experience with Rob Reiner. Haunted, conflicted, and ultimately human.